Hey, it's Kyle here, and today I'm going to take a look at some of my favorite nonfiction books that focus on important figures from America's political history. So I hope you'll enjoy this video. If you do, please hit the like button, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. And with that being said, let me just get started in highlighting these books. I will say these are not ranked in specific order. These are some of my favorite books about figures from America's political history. Now, I am focusing more on political history, so I've avoided books about military events or generals and stuff like that. So first up is The First American, The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H.W. Brands. Benjamin Franklin is such a unique and interesting figure, from his contributions to science, to being such an amazing writer and humorist, to his important influence in American politics and diplomacy. He's just one of those larger life figures that you actually have a hard time believing was a real person. This book does a very great job of examining his entire life, exploring the various aspects of it, and what makes him such an important figure in American political history. So I would definitely recommend this book if you're interested in learning more about Benjamin Franklin. Next up, you have The Triumvirate, The Story of the Unlikely Alliance that Saved the Constitution and United the Nation by Bruce Chadwick. And this book really takes a look at the writing of the Federalist Papers, which was put together by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And the Federalist Papers were basically a series of articles written to lobby for the states to ratify the new Constitution. Which at the time, today you think about the Constitution, you think like, oh, it's always been there. It's such an important part of American political life that everybody had to be for it. But when you study that period of American history, you realize that the Constitution was very controversial, and it was not a sure thing that it was going to pass. In fact, it looked like it probably was not going to be ratified by the states. And these three individuals, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, deserve so much credit for getting the Constitution ratified. And this book takes a great look at these three figures and this effort to get the Constitution ratified. So I would definitely encourage you to read this if you're interested in early American political history, because it really shows you how fragile the new country was after it won independence and the period until it ratified the Constitution several years later, that it was no sure thing that America was going to work. And these three individuals deserve so much credit for ensuring that America actually was going to make it as a country. So definitely would recommend this book. Next up, kind of going off that, is Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. Now, many people are familiar with this book because it is the basis for the musical Hamilton, which is an amazing musical. I got to see it when the traveling shows came to Atlanta. Huge fan of the musical. I actually read this book several years before the musical came out, and one reason I read this book was related to my college background. My major in college actually was political science, and one of my favorite professors at the college I went to was a huge fan of Hamilton. That was the American founding father that he found the most interesting. So he devoted a lot of his class to exploring Hamilton, because he felt like not only was that his favorite founding father, but he felt like Hamilton was often overshadowed by a lot of the better known founding fathers. And he felt like a lot of his students came into college not really knowing much about Hamilton. So I was already kind of aware Hamilton found him interesting, but I really became fascinated by Hamilton while I was in college. And it wasn't too long after that, I think a few years after I graduated, that this book came out. Heard about it, got great reviews, read it, loved it. Several years later, the musical came out, and I was like, there's a rap musical about that book? That's going to be awful. But it ended up being an amazing musical. So one, if you've ever seen the musical and you love it, this is the book it's based off of, and it's amazing. There's a reason why when Lin-Miranda read this book, he was inspired to write the musical. And it goes into a lot more detail than obviously the musical is able to, because it's the musical's over a short period of time, where this book is several hundred pages with like notes, bibliography close to 800 pages. So if you're interested in learning more about Hamilton, definitely read this book. Chernow writes the book in such a way that even though it is a nonfiction book, and probably because Hamilton's life was so interesting, it reads almost like fiction. It has a feeling of a novel, because Hamilton's life almost feels like a plot to a novel. So I would definitely recommend this, especially if you're a fan of the musical. Next up, you have A Country of Vast Designs, James K. Polk, The Mexican-American War, and the Conquest of the American Continent by Robert Mary. The reason I wanted to highlight this book is James Polk is one of those American presidents that most people are not really familiar. They maybe recognize the name, like you say James Polk, you might go, well, I think that was on that list of American presidents I studied in school, but I don't really know much about him. But in reality, he's one of the most influential American presidents in American history. You could easily, I think, rank him as one of the 10 most influential presidents, and he's maybe even borderline top 5. He is very, very influential. And he had even though he was only president for 4 years, he decided not to run for re-election and passed away very quickly after he left office. His impact on American political history is huge. And basically, you could argue easily that after, I was going to say after, but the period before the Civil War, like the 20 or so years before the Civil War, that he was really the only good president we had. We had a string of some very bad and very weak presidents, which ultimately led to the Civil War, because if you'd had a few more stronger presidents, the Civil War maybe could have been averted. And James Polk was really the only good, capable president we had in about a 20-year window. But he is such an important influence on American political history. I think it's a shame that a lot of people don't know about him. So I really wanted to highlight this book and say, like, read this book. And you almost have to read this book, because there's not really that many books written about James K. Polk, partly because nonfiction writers that kind of study that period of American history know that, like, oh, I could write a book about Lincoln or James Madison, and it's going to sell a lot better versus James Polk. People are going to see a book about James Polk in the bookstore, like, who's that? Why do I want to read about that? So check this book out and learn about a figure from American political history that I think more people need to know about. Next up, we have a couple books about maybe the person in America that I think is the most interesting person who's existed, and that's Teddy Roosevelt. It kind of reminds me of, like all those jokes used to go around about Chuck Norris and all the stuff that he could do. I think if you were doing those same jokes in the early 1900s, instead of the subject being Chuck Norris like it was in our period, it would be Teddy Roosevelt jokes, because he is almost like a tall tale type figure, almost like a Paul Bunyan type figure, but he was a real person. He became president. So the two books I wanted to highlight is The River of Doubt by Candice Millard, and The Pulpit by Doris Kearns Goodwin. So I'll highlight this book first. This book really focuses on Teddy Roosevelt's and William Taft, the president that came after him, and their relationship, which was a friendship to begin with, became a rivalry, and how that shaped America. What Teddy Roosevelt's presidency was like, what Taft's presidency was like, how they butted heads, how they upended the American political system. It's a really good book to kind of get an idea of what type of leader and individual Teddy Roosevelt was, but it also does a great job of highlighting William Taft, who is one of the better presidents we've had, a lot like James Polk, that doesn't really get a whole lot of attention. Most people just know William Taft is a butt of jokes because he is the most overweight president that America's had. So most people are like, oh, that's the fat president. But in reality, he was very influential in American history and was a fairly good president, actually. Very interesting book. Doris Kearns Goodwin is one of the more talented nonfiction writers that's in business today, so you definitely should check this book out. Then River of Doubt is just such a fascinating book because it covers such a unique part of Teddy Roosevelt's life, which basically after he kind of exited American politics, he decided, what am I going to do in my free time? You know what? I think I'll go to Brazil and explore a river that's never been successfully boated or traveled the entire length of it. And he did it. And, I mean, that's almost like today, like somebody leaving office. Let's just say like Barack Obama leaving office. You know what? I think I'm going to be one of the astronauts to go to Mars. And he just do it. That's the type of person that Teddy Roosevelt was. You know, like I think I'll go and explore an unexplored river in the Amazon and probably die, but maybe not because I'm Teddy Roosevelt. Again, when you read this book, you'd almost, if somebody didn't tell you it was a nonfiction book, it's like, oh yeah, this is a kind of a cool alternate history book somebody wrote about Ted Roosevelt. No, it's not alternate history. This is a real history. It's very fascinating. So I definitely would recommend this book as well. And then the last book I wanted to highlight is FDR by Gene Edward Smith. Obviously by the title, I'm sure you can guess, a biography about FDR. My favorite president, and if I did a power ranking of I think the best presidents in American history, I usually rank FDR number one, just a little bit ahead of Lincoln. Anybody that knows anything about American history knows the challenges that FDR faced while he was in office, from everything from the Great Depression to World War II, to arguably the biggest challenges America's ever faced happened while he was in the presidency. He overcame so much in his life, from overcoming polio to various other challenges. At the same time, came from one of the most influential families in America. Obviously, his relative, Teddy Roosevelt, was a president. But so much of what is American politics today was shaped by FDR. You can almost view like two periods of American political history. There was politics before FDR, and there was politics after FDR. And we're still living in the world that FDR created in America in a lot of ways. So I would definitely encourage you to read FDR. You know, obviously we're facing some challenging times today in America. And I think a lot of the leadership qualities and the efforts that FDR did while he was president are stuff that we can learn from today. So I definitely recommend this book. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at some of my favorite books about figures in American political history. In the comment section below, let me know what are some of your favorite books in this genre. If you enjoyed this video, again, please hit that like button. And again, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel yet. I really appreciate the support. Thanks for watching, happy reading, and I'll see you the next time.